Hello, hello, hello. This is Greater Gospel Temple and Inspiration of God Ministries right here in Dallas, Texas. It is the 6th of January in the year 2017. And Daniel 1 through 7, and then 8 through 21. So that's where we are today. This is a wonderful, wonderful day. And I am so thankful to God for everything that He's done, everything that He's doing, and everything that He's going to do in my life. Greater Gospel Temple's number is 214-403-7563. The email address is ggtchurch66@yahoo.com. Our subject today is God's plans for our future. God's plans for our future. We're going into our scripture reading here. It's Daniel. Daniel, the first chapter, the 1st through the 7th verses, and then we'll come down to the 8th through the 21st verses. And it is: in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princess, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and Azariah Abednego. All right. Then we go to the 8th through the 21st verses. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech ye, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. How about that? My goodness, and we'll get right on into our commentary. This is our Sunday school lesson. The Sunday school lesson, and it's entitled God's Plans for Our Future. God's Plans for Our Future. Now, King Jehoiakim was appointed king over Judah by the king of Egypt before the Babylonians conquered Egypt and Judah. The third year may refer to Babylonian dating for some time between 606 and 605 BC. Now Daniel was taken to Babylon in the first captivity. Let me get this right. And remained there for the entire 70 years of captivity. So we can see that in Jeremiah, the 25th chapter, the 11th or 13th verses. Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC, and many more Judeans were carried away into exile to Babylon. Now Daniel, the first chapter and the 2nd verse. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Now, because of their sins, because the Judeans had turned from worshiping and serving the true God only to also even sacrificing their children to idols, they forfeited the protection of God. So indeed, as punishment, the Lord actually delivered Judah into the hands of the Babylonians and into exile. God would no longer hear their prayers, and God would punish them at the hands of faraway enemies who would conquer them. And Shinar is another name for Babylon. The gods or idols were probably Marduk and Baal, okay, or Marduk and Baal, or Marduk and Baal. It's M-A-R-D-U-K, all right? Now, perhaps 3 groups of people were meant in this verse, which is verse 3, all right? Perhaps 3 groups of people, perhaps. This is a commentary, okay? Israelites with skills that could be used by the Babylonians, descendants of the house of David, nobles from Judah and other Israelite tribes who had homes in Jerusalem when the city fell to King Nebuchadnezzar. Now the king of Babylon wanted perfect physical specimens of those he defeated in battle to beautify his court and demonstrate his power over other nations. He wanted the best. He wanted the perfect physical specimens of those that he had defeated in battle. He wanted to show them off and show his power, okay? So the sons of the nobility and the descendants of King David and King Solomon would have received the best education the Judean court could have provided. Their knowledge of science, mathematics, and politics would help the Babylonian court when they learned how to speak the Babylonian language, act according to court customs, and learn Babylonian history and literature. The king showed concern for their mental and physical well-being for selfish reasons, probably. Okay, now we can kind of see through that, all right? So God also providentially showed love and concern for the Judean captives who especially remained loyal to God, but who were taken into captivity anyway, as in the case of Daniel and his 3 friends who rose to prominence in the king's service. Now, these 4 young men became examples of how to act if carried into captivity, or if you are under dominion of a government that does not seek to obey the true God and the mortal law. Now, or the moral law, excuse me. Their Judean names probably meant Daniel, meaning God is my judge; Hananiah, meaning God is gracious; Mishael, who is what God is, okay, who is what God is; and then Azariah, God has helped. It says this is probably what the men's name meant, and this is the commentary, okay, and this is the L.G. Parkhurst commentary, and you can find it at ouosu.com. Now, the palace master gave them new names because they were now under a new king and were required to learn a new language and custom. So their new names meant a new worldly authority had conquered them. They now had to have Babylonian names that referenced Babylonian idols. Excuse me. Belteshazzar probably meant protect his life. Shadrach means the command of Aku, meaning the moon god, okay? Meshach may mean who is what Aku is. Abednego means servant of Nebo, another Babylonian god, okay? Now, Daniel's resolve may have influenced the other 3 not to defile themselves either. And if you can remember, we just had a lesson, or either it was a message where it was one of the apostles who would not defile himself, but he went along with what he needed to go along with, but he did not compromise his salvation. And so this is what these 4 friends are doing now. So the book of Daniel does not tell us how many Judeans may have done the same as Daniel, or if there even were other Judeans chosen to serve the king's court. Now, there may have been others from Jerusalem who ate the king's rations, which seems possible since the nation was exiled for their or her repentant or unrepentant idolatry and allegiance to foreign gods. The food and wine had probably been offered to idols first, and some meats God had forbidden his people to eat. Now, emphasizing human responsibility to obey the Lord in the face of danger, Daniel first resolved to obey God completely. He first resolved to obey God completely. And that's where the lesson comes in for us. We must first resolve, in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, we must first resolve to obey God completely. Okay, because God has our future planned out for us. And if we stay in the plan that God has, we will never go wrong. Okay, now then he asked the official over him for permission to avoid eating the king's rations. God intervened at that point, and the palace master showed them favor, compassion, and understanding. That God sustained Daniel in his resolve to remain completely loyal to him. The book of Daniel will continue to illustrate the importance of courageously obeying the Lord in the face of danger and death. This is what it's teaching us. We have to go with God to the end of our days. Whatever comes before us, whatever the circumstances are, we must first resolve to obey God. Okay? Now, the palace master did not command Daniel and his friends to eat the king's food. So he simply expressed his fear of the king to Daniel. And why he feared the king. He feared Daniel and his friends might not look as healthy as the other young men. And if the king discovered that he had disobeyed and had fed them different food, he would be executed. So he put himself in harm's way, but he believed Daniel. So there had to be something there in him to believe Daniel and go along with him. So since the palace master did not approve or deny Daniel's request, Daniel spoke to the palace guard, who had direct responsibility for Daniel and his friends. Now Daniel quietly and patiently persisted in trying to receive the approval of his captors for a diet change instead of defiantly confronting anyone directly and endangering the lives of anybody needlessly. So they used wisdom also. Okay? Now Daniel showed his wisdom by proposing a test regarding the foods they would eat so as not to defile themselves. So rather than eat forbidden meats or meat that had been offered to idols, they would eat vegetables only. So rather than drink wine, and possibly so much wine that it would impair their judgment and ability to learn, they would drink only water. My God. So Daniel did not want to disobey the objective moral law of God that he knew God had given for the benefit of all people. So to show the guard that obeying God's law is better than obeying a king's command, Daniel asked the guard to judge by their appearances as obedient servants of the Lord. Daniel believed that God would bless their appearance if they obeyed him when they were tempted to do wrong or were tested. All right? So the guard saw no harm in agreeing to a short test. So neither the king nor the palace master would notice much change in Daniel's appearance over 10 days, if they even saw him at all. But the palace guard would be particularly attentive to any problems, since his life depended on his obedience and the watchful care over Daniel and his friends. God nourished Daniel and his friends properly when they sought to obey him and not defile themselves by eating unclean food. Their whole godly lifestyle would give them a better appearance than those who ate unhealthy foods and or drank too much wine. So less disciplined or less godly captives might have overindulged because of their good fortune to eat and drink so well, rather than consider the consequences of the long term. Now I must say again that this is commentary. This is not set in stone, because they could have, my opinion, out of obedience just eaten the food because the king ordered them to, but it was offered to idols or not, because they were ordered to and they wanted their lives saved. And it's not said that they overindulged in wine or anything like that. But Daniel's point was that even though the king has ordered us to eat this, all of this food and everything, because he wanted all the best of them, okay? But Daniel said that if you just give us the pulse, just give us that. We don't want to eat the other food. Just give us that. God will take care of us. He believed that. And this man, the guard, put his life on the line for Daniel and his friends. So because of their good fortune to eat and drink so well, but rather than consider the consequences of the long term, it's talking about the others. Now, it's not, like I said, it's not set in stone. And it's not a fact that they overindulged in anything, okay? But Daniel said, if you just trust us, because we trust God, then God will take care of us. So at Daniel's request, the guard may have wisely brought them choice food and wine by the king's standards, in addition to the necessary amount of vegetables and water that Daniel requested. So then Daniel and his friends would eat only vegetables and drink only water, and send the choice food back uneaten. Now, since they looked so well, the guard would no longer need to bring them choice food or wine. You see, he brought the whole dish. whatever the king had ordered them to eat, he would bring it, but Daniel and his friends would only take the water and the vegetables, okay? Now, the purpose of the king's command was to promote the mental and physical well-being of those he had chosen to beautify and serve his court. Now, it would not do for Daniel and his friends to condemn the royal rations and declare defiant disobedience to the king. So, God gave them wisdom and showed them a diplomatic way to obey him and achieve the ultimate purpose of the Babylonian king without disobeying God. God will make a way. It said that there is no temptation that he will allow to come upon us that will not have a way of escape for us. So he'll allow no temptation to come on us without having a way for us to escape that temptation and not yield to that temptation. So what is said here is, and I repeat, God gave them wisdom and showed them a diplomatic way to obey him and achieve the ultimate purpose of the Babylonian king without disobeying God. You see, that's our focus first. Our first thought in any situation is to obey God. So these 4 young men were rewarded by God for their loyalty to God and their unswerving efforts to obey God in everything, even by what they refused to eat and drink. So their diet, no doubt, aided their study and promoted clear thinking. In addition, God gave all 4 of them knowledge, skill, and wisdom beyond human learning. So as far as we know, only Daniel received from God insight into visions and dreams, which he will demonstrate in the king's court throughout the book of Daniel. And we know about him interpreting the dreams, okay, but we won't go there. We're going to stick right here. After 3 years of education and only eating foods approved by God, Daniel and his 3 friends, along with all the other young men who ate and drank the choice food and wine of the king, were brought before King Nebuchadnezzar to be examined and judged personally by him. After having passed the 10-day test of the guard, they were tested again at the end of 3 years by the king himself. Now, they ate vegetables and drank water for 3 years, okay? So the king questioned all those he had formerly set aside for service in his court. None of the exiles from Judah or any other nation except for Daniel and his friends excelled as much as they did as they were examined. My God. Therefore, the most godly and obedient young men from Jerusalem were stationed in the king's court as advisors to the king, which would bring many blessings to the exiled Judeans and perhaps saved many from death. Now, Daniel eventually became the king's most honored and trusted advisor, especially after he faced further tests of his loyalty to God. Now, perhaps unknowingly, the king was always given the best godly advice of Daniel, similar to Joseph as an advisor to Pharaoh in Egypt. Now, magicians and enchanters or astrologers, okay, had occupied the king's court from the beginning of his advisors. Now, to these advisors, the king added 4 men of God, men who prayed and obeyed God no matter what the possible consequences, as the entire book of Daniel shows us, okay? Now, those who listened to God and inquired of God for guidance were 10 times better advisors than those who worshiped idols and sought only worldly wisdom. Now, this fact has been true for hundreds of years in many nations. So Daniel continued to serve in the court of the Babylonians until the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians and Babylon itself fell to King Cyrus. Okay, so we have no indication that Daniel did not continue to serve for some time in the court of King Cyrus. So it seems very likely that he would, now this is commentary, okay? It seems very likely that he would have served King Cyrus and have helped the Judeans return home to Jerusalem at the command of King Cyrus. God, who had blessed Daniel during 70 years of exile, would have continued to watch over him until his work on earth was done. How about that? That is our Sunday school lesson, God's plan for our future. And the focal verse is, the king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered their king's service. That's Daniel, the 1st chapter and the 19th verse. And so we'll go down and we'll finish. Okay, we're going to finish. This is our conclusion of it. Jeremiah, the 29th chapter, the 11th verse, gives hope to all God's people. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. That's Jeremiah, the 29th chapter and the 11th verse. Unknown to the Judeans, when the Lord sent most of them to exile in 587 BC, he had prearranged to meet their spiritual and physical needs in Babylon. Prearranged. See, God's plan for our future. Our future is already planned out by God if we just first remember to obey and honor him. Okay? First remember to obey and honor him. He had prearranged to meet their spiritual and physical needs in Babylon. Before 587 BC, the Lord sent the prophet Ezekiel into exile so he would be in Babylon when they arrived. He's a wonderful God, isn't he? Ezekiel would explain the reasons for their exile, call them to repentance and faith, and give them a realistic hope of returning to Jerusalem after their punishment. So before 587 BC, the Lord sent Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah into exile so they could receive 3 years of training in a language and literature of Babylonia, and be prepared, to enter the service of King Nebuchadnezzar. All right. Now in Daniel, the 1st chapter and the 20th verse, we learn, all right, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters, in his whole kingdom. 10 times better than any of them in his whole kingdom. As the king's best and wisest advisors, most of the time they were able to influence all the king's decisions to the benefit of God's people. To the benefit of God's people. When Ezekiel, Daniel, and Daniel's friends were taken into captivity with the disobedient Judeans, they probably did not know in advance the plans the Lord had for them. But they were the kind of men who would remain faithful to and trust the Lord no matter what happened. Therefore, God could use them to care for his people. Oh my goodness, you know that song, I'm gonna live so God can use me. And I think it's anywhere, Lord, anytime. I'm gonna live so God can use me anywhere, Lord, anytime. It's either anytime, anywhere, or anywhere, Lord, anytime. But I want to live so God can use me. This is our Sunday school lesson, and it's a wonderful lesson, the 1st chapter of Daniel. First chapter of Daniel. And this is always a good story, and it gets better and better as we go along. But remember, the first thing we must resolve in our minds, and no matter what happens, no matter what comes or goes in our lives, God is the first in our lives. And we want to anywhere, anytime. I'm gonna live so God can use me anywhere, Lord, anytime, anywhere, Lord, anywhere, anywhere, Lord, anytime. I'm gonna live so God can use me anywhere, Lord, anytime. Mm-hmm.